The morning my drone caught him in his backyard, Robert Hale, the HOA president, wasn't just trimming his hedges. He was hiding something. And when I hit record, my quiet life ended in 3 seconds. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday. The sun had barely risen over Lakefield Estates, painting every driveway gold, the air still wet with dew. I remember holding my coffee mug, the smell of hazelnut drifting up as I watched the feed on my tablet. My drone hovered steady above the maple trees behind my fence line, camera focused on the open stretch of greenbelt behind our homes. The neighborhood looked perfect from up there. Symmetrical roofs, manicured lawns, peaceful stillness. But perfection, I've learned, is just another kind of camouflage. Through the camera feed, I saw movement behind Robert's property. Fast, nervous movement. He wasn't gardening. He was crouched low near his shed, dragging what looked like a heavy trash bag toward the back gate. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Then, like he sensed it, his head snapped upward, straight at the drone. I froze. The controller trembled in my hands. For a split second, our eyes met through the lens, mine calm and hidden, his wide and furious. He shouted something, his voice sharp even through the drone's faint buzz, but the mic couldn't catch it. He waved his arms, pointing toward my house. Across the street, curtains shifted. One by one, neighbors peeked through blinds and half-open doors, curious about the noise. That's when I felt it, that creeping panic in my chest. I wasn't breaking any law. I was flying above common ground. But the way Robert's face twisted, you'd think I'd just committed a crime. I brought the drone lower, the rotors slicing through the warm morning air. My heart pounded louder than the motors. The sunlight flared against the camera lens, blinding me for a second. I could hear kids laughing down the street. A lawnmower starting, life pretending to stay normal. Then Robert disappeared behind his fence, and I knew something was coming. I set the controller down on the porch rail, trying to steady my hands. My coffee had gone cold. Behind me, the neighborhood's silence thickened, broken only by the soft whine of the drone descending. I was still new here, 3 months in. I'd moved to Lakefield Estates to find peace after years of working freelance photography jobs across the state. I wanted quiet mornings, clean sidewalks, and the kind of stillness you can't find in the city. But Lakefield wasn't peace, it was performance. Every lawn mowed the same length, every mailbox polished, every porch light on at dusk. Robert Hale made sure of it. He was the kind of man who smiled for photos at the HOA barbecue, then fined you for leaving your trash bin out for 5 extra minutes. I'd heard stories before I bought the house, but I didn't believe them. I thought rules were just rules. Until that morning proved otherwise. I brought the drone into land, the rotors slowing to a nervous hum. As I powered it down, a reflection caught my eye, a glint of sunlight on a car windshield. Parked 2 houses away, a silver sedan I didn't recognize sat idling. Inside, someone was watching. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe not. That's when I heard it, the slam of a gate. Robert Hale stepped out onto the street, his face red and tight, sweat shining on his forehead. "Miss Carter," he shouted, his voice booming through the still morning. "We need to talk about your little spy toy." My stomach turned. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains again, watching me, watching him. Suddenly it felt like the entire block had tuned into the same unspoken broadcast, the new girl versus the president. The tension hung between us like static. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him it was a misunderstanding, that I was just filming landscape shots for my photography page. But he didn't want to hear reason. His hands were shaking as he waved a piece of paper. Something official looking, probably another HOA citation. His voice was cold, deliberate, too loud for comfort. "You're violating privacy laws," he said, stepping closer. "You can't record people's homes. This community has standards." His words carried down the street. I felt every eye behind every curtain. The drone sat motionless beside me, blinking silently like a witness I couldn't silence. I wanted to say something smart, something strong, but fear has a way of strangling reason. Instead, I said quietly, I was over the greenbelt. That's FAA jurisdiction, not yours. For a second, he looked stunned. Then the practiced HOA smile returned, the kind that hides teeth behind civility. We'll see about that, he said before turning back toward his house. He left without another word, but I knew what that look meant. He wasn't done. I stood there for a long time after he disappeared, the morning heat settling on my skin, my heart still thudding. The street was empty again, but I could feel the eyes, neighbors pretending not to look, pretending not to care. By the time I gathered my drone and went back inside, I already knew this wasn't over. Robert Hale had drawn a line in the air, and I'd flown straight across it. By sunset, the whole subdivision would know my name and my address. Before everything spiraled into chaos, Lakefield Estates looked like a postcard. Rows of pastel houses trimmed with white fences, magnolia trees lining the sidewalks, and mailboxes so clean they could have been polished by angels. I moved there for that quiet, that illusion of control. After years of freelancing across cities, shooting weddings, real estate listings, and the occasional local news job, I wanted somewhere predictable, a place where mornings started with coffee on the porch and ended with sunsets reflecting off tidy roofs. For the first few weeks, it felt like I'd found exactly that. My neighbors waved every morning like it was rehearsed. Megan Lewis lived 2 houses down, a single mom with a contagious laugh and the kind of kindness that feels real. She'd come by with her little boy Jacob to borrow sugar or drop off leftover brownies. Then there was Linda Marks, the HOA secretary. She was polite in that overly rehearsed way, always carrying a clipboard, always writing something down. And of course there was Robert Hale, the HOA president. Robert was the kind of man who smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. Late 50s, graying hair always slicked back, polo shirts tucked into khakis like he'd been born ready for a meeting. The first time I met him, he was pruning roses outside his yard. He introduced himself with a handshake that lasted a second too long, then immediately commented on the color of my fence. "It's lovely," he said, "but technically, the bylaws prefer neutral tones. Beige, taupe, soft gray. We'll review it at the next board meeting." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Still, he carried himself like a man people obeyed, and in Lakefield Estates, they did. Every weekend, he'd stroll down the sidewalk, checking lawns and jotting notes. Neighbors would wave nervously, pretending to appreciate his dedication. There was something magnetic about him, like a preacher and a politician rolled into one. You couldn't ignore him even if you tried. Back then, my days were slow, peaceful. I'd wake early, brew a pot of hazelnut coffee, and sit on my back porch while the air was still cool. I loved watching light pour over the neighborhood, the smell of jasmine and cut grass mixing with the hum of sprinklers. That's when I started using my drone more often. It wasn't just a hobby, it was therapy. There was something freeing about seeing my world from above, detached and quiet. I'd fly it over the greenbelt behind the houses, capturing shots of the lake at sunrise, kids riding bikes on the trails, the way rooftops formed perfect geometric patterns. From that height, Lakefield looked flawless. I'd post short clips on my photography page, little slices of peace. It was harmless, or at least I thought it was. Megan loved the footage. She'd message me laughing, "Emily, you make our neighborhood look like a resort commercial." But others weren't so kind. I started hearing whispers before I ever saw the stairs. It began at the mailbox one Tuesday afternoon. 2 women I'd seen at HOA events, faces I didn't even know by name, stopped talking as I approached. One of them smiled stiffly, the kind that hides judgment instead of courtesy. "Oh, you're the new photographer, right?" she asked, her voice sugar-coated but sharp. "The one who films everyone's backyards?" I remember blinking, unsure if I'd heard her right. "Excuse me." She shrugged. "Just what people are saying. You know how folks talk. Maybe be careful where you point that thing." That night, I told Megan about it. She rolled her eyes and said, "Ignore them. This neighborhood's allergic to new people. They'll get over it." I wanted to believe her, but the next morning, a folded note appeared under my doormat. No name, no signature, just 3 words written in block letters: "Stop spying on us." It rattled me more than I'd like to admit. I didn't even know who "us" was supposed to be. My drone never flew lower than the rooftops, never crossed into private yards. I checked every video clip, frame by frame, as if searching for proof of my innocence. But all I found were sunsets and trees. When I mentioned the note to Linda Marks, she frowned like I'd confessed to a crime. "Oh, Robert's been worried about that," she said softly. "He mentioned community privacy at the last meeting. Maybe just keep it grounded for a bit?" Grounded. That word stuck in my head, like I was a teenager being punished. Like I'd broken a rule I didn't know existed. That's the thing about Robert Hale. He had a rule for everything, even ones that weren't written down. I noticed the change after that. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Smiles turned to side eyes. The same neighbors who waved every morning now avoided my porch entirely. I didn't understand how it happened so fast, how one man's disapproval could shift an entire street's perception of me. One evening, as I packed away my drone, I saw Robert standing across the cul-de-sac. He wasn't doing anything, just staring, hands behind his back, face unreadable. I waved hesitantly. He didn't wave back. He just turned and walked away. For the first time, the neighborhood felt smaller, the silence heavier. The peace I'd moved for was gone, replaced by something I couldn't name yet, an invisible tension crawling under the surface. If I'd grounded that drone that night, maybe none of this would have happened. The letter showed up 3 days after the morning Robert Hale yelled across the street. It was folded perfectly in a white HOA envelope, the kind that tried to look official but felt heavier with threat than authority. My name, Ms. Emily Carter, was typed neatly across the front. Inside, the message was blunt: "Notice of violation, unauthorized aerial surveillance. Cease and desist all drone activity immediately. Fines may apply." No explanation, no proof, just a warning signed in thick blue ink. Robert Hale, President, Lakefield Estates HOA. I stood in my kitchen rereading it, the words blurring between disbelief and insult. I hadn't broken a single rule. There wasn't a single line in the HOA covenants about drones, or anything close to it. The document, I realized, wasn't about privacy. It was a performance. Later that afternoon, I found him waiting for me near the mailbox like he'd rehearsed it. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, and that same smug posture that made him look taller than he was. As I approached, I could already see curtains shifting from nearby windows. Neighbors had noticed the scene forming. Robert always made sure of that. "Afternoon, Ms. Carter," he said, loud enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear. "Did you get our little reminder?" "Our?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The boards," he replied, tapping his clipboard. "We received multiple complaints. Residents feel uncomfortable knowing you're recording aerial footage over their homes." I forced a smile, though my stomach was burning. "I'm not recording anyone's home. My drone flies over the greenbelt. It's public space. You can check the footage yourself." He gave a half laugh, like I'd said something naive. "See, that's where you're mistaken. Our covenants prohibit any surveillance that may invade community privacy." I blinked. "That's not in the bylaws. I read them before moving here." His smile didn't fade, but his tone sharpened. "I wrote the revisions. It's under Section 4, subsection B, activities that disrupt neighborhood harmony. It's intentionally broad, gives us flexibility." There it was, the word that always hides the abuse of power. Flexibility. I looked down the street. Linda Marks was pretending to check her mail, her eyes darting between us. Across the way, an older couple had stopped walking their dog to watch. It felt like a scene in slow motion, a quiet public trial with no judge, no defense, just the weight of Robert's voice and the neighborhood's silence. "I'm not doing anything illegal," I said finally. And for the record, HOA boards can't regulate airspace. Only the FAA can. His eyebrows lifted, amused. FAA, are you planning to take this federal? He chuckled, looking around to see who was watching. Ms. Carter, nobody wants trouble here. Just cooperation. If you're not spying, then grounding your drone shouldn't be a problem, should it? Every word was designed to make me look unreasonable if I refused. The neighbors would see me as the one stirring conflict. That was his tactic. Control the crowd, not just the conversation. I'm not grounding it, I said quietly. The air between us tightened. His smile disappeared, and for the first time, I saw the flash of real anger beneath that polished surface. He leaned closer, voice low enough that only I could hear. You don't understand how things work here yet. But you will. Then just as quickly, he straightened up and raised his voice again for his audience. Have a nice day, Miss Carter. Remember, the HOA exists to protect you. He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. The curtains that had been half drawn began to fall shut one by one. I stood there frozen, humiliated and furious at the same time. The paper in my hand felt heavier now. Not because of the words printed on it, but because of what it represented: power disguised as policy. When I went inside, I tossed the notice on my counter and poured another cup of coffee just to keep from shaking. The house was quiet, but my head wasn't. The embarrassment started to fade, replaced by something stronger. Anger. Not loud or wild. Cold, focused anger. I pulled up the HOA documents from my welcome packet, flipped through each page until I confirmed what I already knew. There was nothing about drones, nothing about community privacy. Hale had fabricated authority out of thin air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch with my drone beside me, its lights blinking softly in the dark. I thought about the way he'd looked at me, like he owned the air above my house, like he could rewrite laws to fit his will. Maybe he could intimidate others with letters and meetings, but not me. The next morning, I flew again, only higher this time, above the clouds, where the air was free of his reach. The sun rose over Lakefield Estates, and from up there, the streets looked perfect again. Peaceful. Still. But I knew now that perfection was just Robert Hale's favorite lie. His letter wasn't about drones. It was about control. After that letter, everything changed. The neighborhood didn't feel like a place I lived in anymore. It felt like a place that was watching me. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Cars that didn't belong, lights that flickered on at odd hours, conversations that stopped the moment I stepped outside. It was subtle at first, almost invisible, but once you feel eyes on you, you can't unfeel them. The first car appeared a few days later. A navy sedan, same model as the one I'd seen idling near the park weeks ago. It would park across from my house in the afternoons, engine running, tinted windows reflecting the sunlight so I couldn't see inside. Sometimes it stayed 10 minutes, other times nearly an hour. I told myself it was coincidence, someone waiting to pick up a kid, maybe a delivery driver. But when it kept happening at the same time each day, I stopped believing in coincidence. Then came the walkers, 2 HOA volunteers, as they called themselves, doing daily rounds with clipboards and bright vests. They moved slowly, pausing at each driveway to jot something down. One of them, a man named Greg that I barely knew, started taking pictures of my fence. When I asked what he was doing, he just smiled and said, "Documentation for community safety." I laughed, but it came out nervous. Community safety? From what? He didn't answer. He just walked off, clicking photos like he was following orders. By the end of the week, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Every time I stepped outside, someone was watching. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street instead. When I walked my dog, small groups gathered at the corner, pretending to chat, eyes flicking toward me. I'd catch whispers that stopped when I looked their way. One afternoon, I spotted Megan outside trimming her hedges and decided to confront it head on. She'd always been honest, even blunt. If anyone would tell me the truth, it was her. "Megan," I called, walking up her driveway. Be honest with me, are people saying something? She hesitated, pruning shears frozen midair. Emily, you know how people get around here. They like drama. What kind of drama? She sighed and lowered her voice. There's this thread on the Neighborhood Facebook group. Someone posted screenshots of your drone videos. Said you're filming people sunbathing, watching kids play. It's ridiculous, but I felt my stomach twist. But Robert didn't deny it, she said quietly. He just said the HOA was handling the issue. That was enough. That's how it spreads. Not through proof, but through silence. A well-timed pause, a missing denial. Hale didn't need to accuse me directly. He just needed to plant the seed. I thanked her and went home, my thoughts spinning. That night, I found the post. There it was. My footage, screenshots stripped of context, twisted captions underneath. Would you feel safe knowing someone's drone flies over your home? The comments were a circus. Half of them calling me creepy, the other half demanding the HOA take action. Hale himself had commented once. We're aware of the situation. Privacy is important to us all. No defense, no clarification, just authority cloaked in concern. And behind him, there was Linda Marks. She'd started showing up at every corner of my life, walking by my house during her morning exercise, asking neighbors innocent questions about me. I caught her once photographing my mailbox for record keeping. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "Just doing what Robert asked. You understand, don't you?" I understood perfectly. He wasn't just using policy anymore. He was using people. The tension in the neighborhood became a living thing. Every rustle outside, every passing car, every porch light flicking on felt loaded with suspicion. I couldn't even take my trash out without feeling judged. That's when I decided to fight back quietly. If they were watching me, I'd watch back. I installed new security cameras, one at the front door, one along the side of the house, and one aimed directly at the backyard. I even wired a motion sensor to send alerts straight to my phone. I wasn't going to let paranoia eat me alive. I wanted proof, something solid. The first few nights, nothing happened. Just raccoons and wind. But I slept easier knowing I had eyes of my own now. And the irony wasn't lost on me. I was accused of spying, yet they were the ones who turned surveillance into sport. I started researching homeowner rights too. That's when I discovered something important, buried deep in a legal form. You have the right to record on your property for safety, even if others find it uncomfortable. It was a simple truth, but it gave me power again. Hale might control the HOA, but he didn't control my home. Still, every night I'd look through those grainy security clips before bed, half dreading what I might find. It was only a matter of time before something or someone showed up. And then one night, they did. It was just after 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Half asleep, I opened the feed, expecting another stray cat or swaying branch. Instead, I froze. There was movement inside my fence line, 2 figures, one holding a flashlight, moving slowly toward my back door. My hand trembled as I zoomed in on the footage. Then my security camera caught movement inside my fence line. The alert came at 2:03 a.m., a soft buzz from my phone, followed by a blinking red notification. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I remember sitting up too fast, heart thudding like a warning drum in my chest. The house was silent, the kind of silence that hurts your ears. I swiped open the live feed, expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a fallen branch. But what I saw made my blood run cold. 2 figures, inside my fence line. They moved carefully, their shadows long and nervous under the pale wash of my porch light. One held a flashlight, sweeping it across the yard like he was searching for something. The other stood by the fence, checking over his shoulder as if to make sure no one was watching. The image blurred for a moment, but when the taller one turned toward the camera, the frame caught his face, clear as daylight. Robert Hale. My breath caught in my throat. The HOA president was in my backyard at 2 a.m, and beside him, unmistakable even through the grainy feed, was Greg, one of his so-called community watch volunteers. I stared at the screen, frozen between disbelief and fear. Hale was pointing at the corner of my property where my drone charging station sat, whispering something to Greg before bending down. Then, the sound, metal snapping. My gate latch. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher's voice came through calm, practiced. 911, what's your emergency? There are 2 men in my yard? I whispered. They broke my gate. One of them is the HOA president. They're trespassing. Are they armed? I don't know. One has a flashlight. Stay inside, ma'am. Officers are on their way. I hung up, pulled the curtains closed, and sat in the dark listening. Outside, footsteps crunched softly against the gravel path behind my garden. I could hear faint murmurs, the click of the flashlight turning off, the creak of the gate closing again. Then silence. By the time the patrol car rolled up 20 minutes later, the yard was empty. 2 officers got out, their flashlights sweeping across the grass. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, asked for the footage. I showed him the video, my voice trembling as I explained who the men were and what I'd seen. He watched, squinting at the screen. When the frame froze on Hale's face, he exhaled slowly, then looked at his partner. "That's your HOA guy, huh?" "Yes," I said. "You can see him right there. That's him." The other officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, ma'am, I get that this feels wrong, but this sounds like an HOA matter. Maybe they were conducting a property inspection." "At 2 in the morning?" My voice cracked. "Without permission?" "They broke my gate." He shrugged. "It's tricky. You live in a covenant-controlled neighborhood. These things can get complicated." I wanted to scream. "Complicated?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is trespassing." "That's not complicated. It's illegal." They exchanged a glance, clearly unwilling to get involved. "We'll make a note of it," one said, writing something in his notepad without looking up. "If anything else happens, give us a call." When they left, the silence that followed was worse than before. The red and blue lights faded down the street, leaving only the hum of crickets and the faint, metallic rattle of my broken latch in the breeze. I went back inside and locked every door, every window, then sat on the edge of my couch watching that same 10-second clip on repeat. Hale's face lit by flashlight, Greg's shadow moving across my garden, the sound of the latch breaking, over and over again until it burned into my mind. That night, fear stopped being abstract. It wasn't about rumors or stares anymore. It was the sound of my privacy being shattered, quietly, deliberately, by the very man who claimed to protect it. I realized how powerless I was in that moment, how easily he could invade not just my property, but my peace. But fear has an expiration date. By sunrise, it hardened into something else. I printed the footage, backed it up, and sent copies to 3 different drives. I wrote down everything I remembered in detail, the time, the sounds, the direction they came from. If the police wouldn't act, I would. That morning I stood in my backyard under the same sky they'd trespassed beneath, and I made myself a promise. That was the last night Robert Hale would ever walk into my yard uninvited. That's when I stopped playing nice. The first fine arrived 2 days after the police left. A bright yellow slip taped to my front door, flapping against the glass like a warning flag. Violation, unsightly trash receptacle. Fine, $75. I stood there staring at it, stunned. My bins were tucked behind the fence, same as always. There wasn't even trash pickup that day. It would have been laughable if it hadn't felt so deliberate. By the end of the week, 2 more arrived. One claimed my lawn was exceeding community height limits. Another accused me of excessive exterior lighting. Each one stamped with Hale's signature, each more absurd than the last. It was harassment disguised as paperwork. The messages were clear. If he couldn't scare me off, he'd bleed me dry with bureaucracy. When I called the HOA office to dispute them, Linda Marks answered. Her tone was polite, but the kind of polite that means don't bother. All violations are reviewed by the board, Emily, she said sweetly. If you believe they're in error, you're welcome to address them at the next community meeting. So I did. That Tuesday evening, the community hall smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Dozens of metal chairs lined the narrow room, filled with faces that avoided looking at me. Robert Hale sat at the head table, his expression perfectly neutral, flanked by Linda and two other board members. He waited until I walked in before announcing loudly, "Ah, Ms. Carter has arrived. Good. We can discuss her repeated noncompliance." Murmurs rippled through the room. I took a seat near the front, hands gripping my notepad. Hale began reading from a list, his voice smooth and deliberate. Violation 1. Trash receptacle left visible from the street. Violation 2. Unapproved outdoor lighting. Violation 3. Noise. Disturbance. Mechanical in nature, possibly drone-related. The last one drew a few chuckles from the back. My cheeks burned. "Mr. Hale," I said, standing up, "none of these are valid. My trash is behind my fence, my lights are solar garden fixtures, and my drone flights are over public land." He tilted his head, that faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Miss Carter, these rules exist for everyone's comfort. If your neighbors feel disturbed, we must act accordingly. So hearsay is policy now. Perception," he said smoothly, "is reality in community management." It was masterful manipulation. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply reframed the narrative until right and wrong no longer mattered. Around the room, I could see heads nodding, people I'd once waved to now avoiding my eyes. It wasn't a meeting. It was a performance. And Hale was both director and star. Linda sat beside him, scribbling every word into the minutes. Occasionally she'd glance at me, expression unreadable, as if she pitied me but not enough to stop writing. When I tried to speak again, Hale cut me off. "Ms. Carter, you've been warned repeatedly about disruptive behavior. Perhaps it's time you reconsider whether this community is the right fit for you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every sound, the hum of the lights, the shuffle of feet, felt like it was amplified. I gathered my papers, heart pounding, and walked out before I gave him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Outside, the evening air was thick with humidity and shame. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, replaying every smug word in my head. Fear was still there, coiled tight in my stomach, but something else was starting to take shape beside it. Determination. When I got home, I opened my laptop and began to dig. HOA statutes, state regulations, homeowner rights. I read until my eyes blurred. That's when I found it. A clause buried deep in a legal article about property governance. An HOA's authority ends at the property boundary unless explicitly expanded by recorded covenant. In other words, everything Hale had done outside those boundaries, every late-night inspection, every property check, wasn't just harassment, it was illegal. I printed it out and pinned it to my wall. Then I downloaded a recording app onto my phone and labeled a new folder, HOA Evidence. From that night forward, every conversation, every notice, every interaction with Robert Hale or his board would be documented, word for word, frame by frame. He wanted to play by his rules. I was done playing altogether. If he wanted evidence, I'd give him hours of it. By the next week, my house looked less like a home and more like a command center. Cameras lined the eaves. Small microphones hid inside porch planters and under the mailbox. Every device fed into a central drive on my desk. Time-stamped, backed up twice, labeled by date and angle. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was documenting everything. The first recording came sooner than I expected. Robert Hale showed up that Tuesday, striding across my lawn like he owned the grass beneath his shoes. I caught the moment his shadow crossed my porch camera, a confident, heavy silhouette framed against the late morning sun. I didn't go outside right away. I let him ring the bell twice before answering, phone already recording in my pocket. He smiled, that politician's grin that never reached his eyes. "Miss Carter," he began, We need to discuss your continued defiance of HOA regulations. I leaned against the doorway, pretending to be calm. Regulations that don't exist, you mean? His jaw tightened, but his tone stayed even. You're developing quite a reputation here. People talk. They say you record them. You make this community uncomfortable. That's not how we do things in Lakefield. I don't break laws, Robert. You do, I said quietly, and I've got the footage to prove it. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Panic, maybe, but then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. You want to play the victim? Fine, but I can make your life miserable if you keep pushing this. Think fines are bad? Wait until you see what legal pressure feels like. I didn't flinch. The entire conversation was already saved, audio crisp and clear. That one line, I can make your life miserable, was exactly what I needed. After he left, I played it back a dozen times, not because I doubted what I'd heard, but because I couldn't believe how calm I sounded in response. For the first time, fear didn't control the conversation. I did. That night I called Megan. She'd been one of the few still willing to talk to me, though even she sounded cautious these days. I told her about the recording, about the cameras, about the pattern of fines and trespassing. Emily, she said softly, this is getting dangerous. You need to go public. Don't just keep it for yourself. Make people see what he's doing. I hesitated. You think anyone would believe me? Not at first, she admitted. But they'll believe what they see. Show them. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the hum of electronics and the faint buzz of the cameras outside. Megan was right. Hale's power came from silence, from people too afraid to speak out. If I wanted to take that away, I had to expose him on his own stage, this perfect little community he ruled over. Still, I needed to make sure what I was doing was legal. I wasn't going to hand him ammunition. Hours of research later, I found exactly what. I was looking for one-party consent laws. In most states, as long as one person in the conversation agrees to the recording, it's admissible. I didn't need his permission. I just needed to press record. That discovery changed everything. It wasn't just reassurance. It was empowerment. I was done being the quiet one, the neighbor everyone whispered about. If Hale wanted to monitor me, I'd monitor him harder, smarter, and within the law. Each recording became a piece of armor, his threats, his tone, the fake professionalism that cracked the second he felt challenged. I built a library of truth while he built his lies. And the best part? He didn't know a thing about it. Not yet, because I didn't just collect evidence. I broadcast it. The rain started just after 9, thin, cold sheets tapping against my windows, the kind of storm that makes everything sound closer than it is. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing footage from earlier that week, when the motion alert flashed on my phone again. Backyard camera. Movement detected. My stomach dropped. I clicked the feed, and there he was. Robert Hale. Even through the rain, his posture was unmistakable. Rigid, commanding, like the world still owed him its silence. He wasn't alone this time. Greg trailed behind, holding a flashlight under his jacket to block the beam. They slipped through my side gate as if it were routine, rain dripping off their coats. Hale gestured toward my porch, mouthing something I couldn't hear. My heart slammed against my ribs. I could have called 911 again, but I already knew how that would go. So instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the Neighborhood Facebook group, and clicked Go Live. For a second, I just stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. Hair pulled back, eyes wide, breath shallow. Then the live counter blinked on. If you're watching this, I whispered, you're about to see what Robert Hale does to the people he can't control. The feed switched to my security camera view, grainy but clear enough. Rain shimmered under the porch light as Hale's voice broke through the audio. You think you're clever, don't you? He shouted, pacing across my patio. Recording me, threatening my position. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in? Greg muttered something about leaving, but Hale snapped, no, not until she learns. He kicked over one of my flower pots, shards scattering across the wet concrete. My viewer count jumped. 5, then 12, then 20. Comments started flooding in. Is that Robert Hale? What's going on? Is this live? I kept the camera steady, zoomed in closer. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady when I spoke again. You're trespassing, Robert. This is being recorded and streamed. Everyone in Lakefield can see you. He froze, looking straight at the camera like he was staring down the barrel of a gun. Turn it off, he demanded. You have no right? FAA regulates airspace, I said evenly. And this is my property. I have every right. For a heartbeat, everything went still except for the rain. Then he exploded. You think you can embarrass me? You think the board will side with you after this circus? He stomped toward the camera, face twisted in fury. Behind him, Greg backed away, whispering, Robert, she's live. It's public. But Hale didn't stop. You're finished here, he shouted, pointing toward my house. I'll make sure you're fined, sued, evicted. A thunderclap drowned out the rest of his words, but his rage filled the screen. Viewers were now over 100. Neighbors, friends, strangers. The comments scrolled so fast I could barely read them. He's lost it. Call the police. She's brave for streaming this. For months I'd lived under his control, under his gaze. But in that moment, the power shifted. The fear that had pinned me down for weeks cracked wide open and spilled into something I hadn't felt in forever. Vindication. I stepped onto the porch, camera still rolling. Hale spun toward me, drenched and furious. You'll regret this, he hissed. No, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the rain. You will. He realized too late that he wasn't shouting at just me anymore. He was shouting at the entire neighborhood. The comments turned from disbelief to outrage, screenshots spreading faster than I could refresh the page. And then, as suddenly as it began, he left, storming off into the darkness, Greg trailing behind. The rain swallowed their footsteps, and all that remained was the sound of my drone hovering above, capturing everything from the air. When I finally ended the stream, the viewer count read 412. My hands trembled, but this time it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. For the first time since this began, the truth wasn't locked on my hard drive. It was out in the world. By morning, the video had spread beyond Lakefield Estates. By sunrise, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Messages, emails, friend requests from people I didn't even know. The live stream had exploded overnight, shared across neighborhood groups, local forums, even a few small news pages. In less than 12 hours, the video had racked up thousands of views. I hadn't just exposed Robert Hale to Lakefield Estates. I'd exposed him to the entire county. The neighborhood split like a fault line. Half the residents cheered me on. People I'd never spoken to stopped me on morning walks just to say, "Good for you." The other half avoided me like I carried a disease. Lawns that once hosted friendly waves now stood silent, blinds drawn. I could feel the tension with every step, like the whole street was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. It came that afternoon. Hale showed up again, this time not on my property, but across the street, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. I watched from my window as he waved a machinaciti envelope in the air, face red and tight. When I stepped outside, the rain from the night before still clung to the air, thick and heavy. "There she is," he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "The internet celebrity." His voice dripped with venom. "You thought humiliating me online would protect you? You've committed defamation, Ms. Carter." "I've already filed a complaint." The officers exchanged glances but said nothing. I kept my tone calm. "Everything I posted was real. You trespassed on my property and destroyed my belongings. That's not defamation, it's evidence." He took a step forward, his shoes splashing in the puddles. "You recorded me without consent. You broadcasted it. You think anyone's going to believe you didn't break the law?" One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, we've reviewed the video." His tone was careful, almost apologetic. There's no criminal recording violation. The incident occurred in public view, on property visible from the street. That means no reasonable expectation of privacy. Hale turned on him like he'd been slapped. Excuse me? The officer continued. And for defamation to apply, there'd have to be a false statement. The footage speaks for itself. For the first time, Hale didn't have words ready. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stood there, drenched in a silence that said more than any argument could. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual certainty. "This isn't over," he muttered. He handed the envelope to me. An official notice from the HOA board. It read, "Emergency hearing, member conduct violation, attendance mandatory." The meeting was set for that evening. When I walked into the community hall that night, the air felt charged. Every chair was filled. Some people nodded to me in quiet solidarity. Others whispered as I passed. Hale sat at the front of the room, posture stiff, his smile carefully stitched back together. Linda Mark sat beside him, typing notes, refusing to meet my eyes. The meeting started like a courtroom drama. Hale stood and read from a printed statement about disruptive behavior, cyber harassment, and damage to community reputation. His words were sharp but hollow, rehearsed like a man reading from a play he'd written for himself. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I played the video on a projector, the live stream, the comments, the moment his boot smashed my flower pot. Every sound echoed through the hall. You could have heard a pin drop. When it ended, Hale tried to recover, insisting it was taken out of context, but the board members weren't nodding this time. The silence was different now. Heavier, skeptical. For once, he looked smaller behind that table. After a few tense minutes, one of the board members, a woman named Carol who'd never spoken much before, called for a vote. The decision was quick. Temporary. Suspension of Emily Carter's HOA membership pending investigation. It was a meaningless gesture, a way to appease Hale's pride while buying time. I left the hall with my head high. The night air was sharp and cold, but it tasted clean. I'd lost my membership, maybe, but not my voice. The truth was already out there, impossible to contain. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Robert Hale was done with letters. Now he wanted lawyers. The morning after the emergency meeting, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printed notices, screenshots, and folders thick with evidence. Every fine, every message, every time-stamped clip, laid out like a war map. I was done defending myself alone. It was time to fight back properly. That's when I called Daniel Price. He came recommended by a local journalist who'd covered HOA abuses before. A quiet, deliberate man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice that could slice through panic. When I first met him at his small downtown office, he didn't talk much. He just listened. I told him everything, from the first complaint to the live stream, and when I finally ran out of breath, he leaned back and said, "You've got them cornered, Emily. They overstepped every legal boundary they had." He flipped through the printed HOA rules I'd brought. "No mention of drones," he said flatly. "Not even close. The FAA controls all airspace. They can't touch you there." "Can we prove that?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Already did. I called an FAA contact while you were talking." He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a formal letter from the Federal Aviation Administration confirming that my flights, as documented, were completely within federal guidelines. "This," he said, tapping the paper, "is your shield. And now, we're going to build your sword." That sword came in the form of a cease and desist letter addressed directly to the Lakefield Estates HOA, care of Robert Hale. It was clinical, precise, and devastating. It accused the board of harassment, unlawful trespassing, falsified citations, and defamation. It demanded an immediate retraction of all violations and a public apology, or face civil litigation under state and federal law. Daniel had the letter couriered the next morning. By noon, Hale had received it. By 1, my phone started buzzing. Megan texted first. Did you send something to the HOA? Hale's losing it. I didn't answer, but I could picture it. The man who'd built his kingdom on fear now realizing the walls were starting to crack. The shift was immediate. Hale stopped patrolling the neighborhood, stopped showing up at houses unannounced. At the next board meeting, he didn't even sit at the head table. Linda Marks took over the agenda, reading nervously from notes while he stared at the floor. Daniel and I watched from the back of the room. Every time Hale tried to speak, someone interrupted him. One board member, a retired teacher named Paul, finally said what everyone else had been whispering. You went too far, Robert. This isn't leadership anymore. It's personal. The look on Hale's face in that moment told me everything. The man who once ruled this neighborhood with smug precision now looked cornered, his authority unraveling thread by thread. Still, I didn't relax. People like him don't crumble quietly, they lash out. 2 days later, he did. I was leaving for work when I saw him pacing outside my gate, his face pale and drawn. For a second, I thought he was there to apologize, but when he looked up, his eyes were wild. You think you've won, he said, voice low but shaking. You think this little lawyer stunt changes anything? I built this place. These people trust me. They trusted you. I corrected softly. He stepped closer, his voice rising. I made one mistake, and now you've turned everyone against me. You've destroyed my reputation. Do you know what that's worth? I didn't answer. Instead, I pointed to the camera above the gate. Its red light blinked steadily. You might want to stop talking, I said. You're being recorded again. He froze. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit the gate. Instead, he backed away, breathing hard, muttering something about getting his attorney involved. Then he turned and stormed off. That evening, Daniel called. He got the letter, he said, almost amused. And now he's panicking. I just heard from the HOA's counsel, they're pulling representation. His own lawyer doesn't want to touch this anymore. I sank back into my chair, relief and disbelief mixing in equal measure. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was winning. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the unease. I'd cornered him, yes, but cornered animals don't surrender. They bite. And Robert Hale was about to prove it. Then he did something so reckless. Even his lawyer walked out. The night of the final meeting, the HOA hall felt more like a courtroom than a neighborhood gathering. Every chair was taken. Neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, their voices hushed with anticipation. Even the air smelled tense, a mix of stale coffee and fear. Word had spread that tonight wasn't just another meeting about lawn heights or fence colors. Tonight was about Robert Hale. I walked in with Daniel Price by my side, a folder of documents clutched in my hands so tightly my knuckles were white. The whispers followed me as I made my way to the front row. That's her, someone murmured. The one who streamed it. Another voice replied, good for her. It's about time someone stood up to him. I wanted to believe they meant it, but part of me wondered how many of them would have done the same if they'd known what it would cost. Robert Hale sat at the head of the table, alone this time. His once perfect hair looked thinner, his tan faded, and his smile, the weapon he'd used to rule this neighborhood, was gone. Beside him, Linda Marks stared at her lap, her pen motionless. The board members looked uneasy, eyes darting between him and the growing crowd. Daniel leaned toward me. Stay calm, he whispered. Let the evidence speak for itself. The meeting began with forced formality. Hale cleared his throat, his voice strained but still trying to sound authoritative. This meeting is to address certain accusations and misunderstandings regarding the events of the past month. He adjusted his tie, though his hands trembled slightly. I want to remind everyone that online videos can be misleading. What's been circulating does not represent the truth. That was my cue. I stood. The room went silent. Then let's show them the truth, I said. Daniel connected his laptop to the projector, and the screen behind Hale flickered to life. The video began, the same footage that had spread online, but this time, in high definition, with every timestamp and audio clip preserved. Hale's face lit up on the screen, drenched in rain, voice raised, kicking my flower pot, threatening me in front of hundreds of live viewers. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as the footage rolled on. When it ended, I stepped forward and held up the FAA letter. "This," I said, "is from the Federal Aviation Administration. It confirms my flights were legal, within federal guidelines. This letter," I held up another, "is from my attorney, documenting every false violation issued against me. And this," I pointed back to the screen, "is your president breaking the law on my property." For a long, unbearable moment, Hale said nothing. Then he snapped. "You think you can embarrass me?" he shouted, slamming his palm on the table so hard the microphone squealed. "You think you can waltz in here with your lawyer and your little fan club and destroy my reputation? You're nothing, Emily. You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the room. A few neighbors stood up, moving closer to the exits. One of the board members, a man named Paul, spoke up, voice shaking. "Robert, stop. You're making this worse." "Worse?" Hale barked. "I built this community. I kept it clean. I kept it safe." Daniel calmly raised his phone, pressing record. "Please continue, Mr. Hale," he said. That only fueled him further. Hale turned his rage toward the crowd. "You all sit there judging me, pretending you're better. But without me, this place would fall apart. You'd let weeds grow, paint peel, strangers move in, and destroy what I made." That's when the door opened, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. The room froze. Hale's voice faltered mid-sentence as the taller officer unfolded a paper from his clipboard. "Robert Hale?" he said evenly. "We have a citation and summons for criminal trespass, destruction of property, and harassment, pending further investigation." The color drained from Hale's face. "You can't be serious." "I'd suggest you come quietly, sir," the officer replied. "This isn't a request." He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Even Linda wouldn't meet his gaze. Slowly, almost mechanically, he stood. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "You'll regret this. All of you." But no one spoke as the officers led him out, the echo of his shoes fading into silence. The moment the door closed, the tension broke. Someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the whole room joined in, not out of joy exactly, but relief. The kind of applause that comes when a storm finally passes, even if it leaves wreckage behind. The board moved swiftly after that. Paul took charge and called an emergency vote. The motion to remove Robert Hale as HOA president passed unanimously. No objections. No hesitation. Linda typed it into the minutes with shaking hands. When the gavel fell, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. Justice had come, but too late to repair what had been broken. The neighbors who once smiled at me now couldn't meet my eyes. The trust that once defined this place was gone, replaced by fear of who might be watching next. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of distant sirens still echoing, I looked back one last time at the hall where Hale's empire had crumbled. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, casting long, distorted shadows across every driveway. He left in handcuffs, but his shadow lingered on every driveway. It's strange how peace returns, not with applause or closure, but with silence. Months have passed since the night Robert Hale was led away in handcuffs, and Lakefield Estates has grown quiet again. The lawns still look perfect, the mailboxes still shine, and the same kids still ride their bikes in lazy circles down the cul-de-sac. But something beneath that perfection has changed. Maybe it's the air, lighter now, less watched. Or maybe it's me. A new board was elected 2 weeks later. Paul became president, Megan joined as secretary, and for the first time since I moved here, the HOA meetings felt human. No lectures, no staged authority, just neighbors trying to rebuild what one man's control had broken. The bogus fines vanished. The online rumors disappeared. And slowly, people started waving again. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that simple gesture until it came back. This morning, I took my drone out for the first time since everything happened. The air was still, the kind that carries sound for miles. When I launched it, the hum filled the sky, like an old friend returning home. It rose above the rooftops, over the lake, gliding steady through the crisp air. The neighborhood looked smaller from up there, softer somehow. You could almost forget the months of tension, the fear, the nights I spent staring at motion alerts, waiting for the next knock on my door. Almost. I guided the drone higher, past the line of magnolias that marked the edge of my property. The screen glowed pale in my hands, the image so clear it felt unreal. The streets were empty, the sun stretching gold across the driveways. For a long moment, I just hovered there, watching my world from the safety of distance. The sky above me was open again. Megan stopped by later that afternoon. She brought coffee, like she always does, and sat beside me on the porch. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" she said. "It does," I told her. "It's quiet." She smiled, sipping her cup. "Quiet's good. You earned it." But as we talked, I caught movement down the street, just a flicker. Linda Marks, walking briskly, a clipboard in hand, talking to one of the newer residents. They both turned when they noticed me watching. Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile I'd seen on Robert Hale 100 times before, the kind that hides intentions behind civility. Megan followed my gaze, then sighed. "Guess some people never learn." "Guess not," I said softly. I glanced back toward the sky, where my drone hovered quietly above us, the last traces of sunlight gleaming off its silver frame. For a while, we just sat there, listening to the faint buzz fading into the blue. The neighborhood was calm, almost peaceful, but I knew better now. Peace in Lakefield Estates wasn't permanent. It was a pause between storms. If you've ever faced someone drunk on power, an HOA president, a boss, or even a neighbor, then you know exactly how it feels to be silenced until you fight back. What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Tell me in the comments. I read every single story. If you believe standing your ground still matters, hit that like button and share this video so others know their rights too. And don't forget to subscribe, because next week I'm exposing another HOA that went even further than Robert Hale.